The ancient Galactic Artifacts Museum stood like a crystalline fortress in the heart of New Seoul, its bioluminescent walls pulsing with a gentle blue glow that could be seen from orbit. Tonight, as the galaxy prepared to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the Galactic Council's formation, the museum was darker than usual, its exhibits sleeping under layers of energy shields and temporal stasis fields. Lynn adjusted her security uniform for the 20th time that evening, her boots echoing softly against the polished floor as she made her routine patrol through the East Wing. At 25, she had taken the job at the museum, not out of passion for ancient artifacts or galactic history, but because it paid well and required minimal interaction with the public. The irony that the most significant archaeological discoveries in the galaxy sat just meters away from her daily path was not lost on her. She simply chose to ignore it. Just another boring night, she muttered to herself, checking her chronometer. 2 more hours until her shift ended, and then she could return to her modest apartment, heat up some synthetic noodles, and lose herself in holographic dramas about people whose lives were far more interesting than hers. The lights flickered once, twice, then plunged the museum into complete darkness. Emergency lighting activated immediately, casting eerie red shadows throughout the corridors. Lynn's hand instinctively went to her comm device, but before she could contact Central Security, a new light caught her attention. From the direction of the restricted Elder Artifacts wing, a soft blue glow was pulsing rhythmically, growing brighter with each beat, like a mechanical heartbeat. "That's impossible," she whispered. The Elder Artifacts were kept in quantum-locked chambers, impossible to access without authorization from at least 3 council members simultaneously. And yet the glow was definitely coming from Exhibit Chamber 7 Alpha, which housed the most controversial piece in the museum's collection, the Caliburn armor. The Caliburn armor had been discovered 3 decades ago on a dead world in the Andromeda Spiral, a relic of the mysterious elder races, who had vanished eons before the first council species achieved interstellar flight. Every major power in the galaxy had tried to claim it, study it, or activate it. The armor had rejected them all, remaining as inert as any piece of ancient metal, despite clearly being composed of materials that defied current understanding of physics. The light pulsed again, brighter this time, and Lynn heard a sound that made her blood run cold, the distinctive click-whir of a quantum lock disengaging. Her training kicked in. She should have called for backup, evacuated the building, triggered every alarm the museum had. Instead, she found herself walking toward the glow, her feet moving of their own accord, as if pulled by an invisible force. The chamber door was open. Inside, the Caliburn armor stood in its display case, no longer the dull, metallic gray she remembered from her orientation tour. Instead, it blazed with internal light patterns of energy, racing across its surface like living circuits. The armor was beautiful in a way that transcended mere aesthetics. It was beautiful the way a perfect equation was beautiful, the way the spiral of a galaxy was beautiful, the way the birth of a star was beautiful. And it was looking at her. She couldn't explain how she knew this. The armor had no visible eyes, no distinguishable face, just a smooth helm that seemed to shift and flow like liquid metal. But she felt its attention as surely as she felt gravity pulling her toward the floor. The display case opened with a soft hiss. "No, no, no," Lynn backpedaled, her rational mind finally catching up with her body. "This is not happening. I'm having a breakdown. Too much caffeine. Should have taken my vacation days." But even as she spoke, she couldn't take her eyes off the armor. Because behind her fear was something else: recognition. Not of the armor itself, but of the feeling that washed over her as she looked at it. It was the same feeling she'd had as a child, staring up at the stars from her family's rooftop garden, wondering what was out there. The same feeling she'd had when she'd dreamed of joining the Council's Exploration Corps before life had convinced her to choose safety over adventure. The armor raised one gauntleted hand in what could only be described as a greeting. Lynn's comm device crackled to life. All units, we have multiple unauthorized vessels approaching the museum. Possible hostile intent. Repeat, possible hostile intent. The sound of her colleague's voice broke the spell. Lynn stumbled backward, finally remembering how to operate her legs, and ran for the exit. Behind her, she heard a sound like a dozen wind chimes made of crystal, musical and alien, and somehow amused. She made it exactly 12 steps before the museum's main doors exploded inward. 3 figures in environmental suits strode through the smoke and debris, their movements too fluid to be entirely biological. Lynn recognized the markings on their suits immediately. Harlan Ascendancy on the left, Vex Imperium on the right, and a third faction she didn't recognize bringing up the rear. The human is here. The Harlan representative spoke its translator, rendering the words in perfect, standard galactic. Despite the translation, Lynn could hear the contempt in its tone. Insignificant. We will claim the armor and be done with this farce. The Vex representative made a sound that might have been laughter if the Vex were capable of humor. The Council has given the armor ample time to choose a worthy bearer. Since it has rejected all superior candidates, it will now be claimed by right of conquest. Excuse me, Lynn found herself saying, surprising herself with the steadiness of her voice. I think there's been a misunderstanding. This is a museum, not a conquest zone. And visiting hours ended 3 hours ago. All 3 aliens turned toward her, and through their helmet visors, she saw eyes that regarded her with about as much interest as she might show a particularly unremarkable pebble. The third alien, whose suit bore no factional markings, but seemed to shimmer with contained energy, stepped forward. Human female, you will direct us to the Elder Artifact designated Caliburn. Compliance will result in minimal injury. Oh, Lynn said, nodding seriously. Minimal injury. Well, that's very considerate of you, but I'm afraid I'll have to decline. Company policy and all that. The unmarked alien raised what was clearly a weapon. Your humor is noted and disregarded. The artifact. Now. A new voice echoed through the hallway, clear and distinctly human. I'm afraid the armor you're looking for is no longer available for claiming. Dr. Mai stepped out of the shadows near the elevator bank, and if Lynn hadn't been having the most surreal night of her life already, she might have been more surprised. Dr. Tui Mai was the galaxy's leading expert on elder race archaeology, a woman whose research papers were required reading in xenoarchaeology programs across 12 star systems. She was also supposed to be on Rigel Prime, giving the keynote address at the Council Anniversary Symposium. Dr. Mai, Lynn whispered, relief flooding through her. What are you... Lynn Nguyen, Dr. Mai interrupted smoothly. May I suggest you return to Exhibit Chamber 7 Alpha? I believe you'll find something there that requires your immediate attention. The 3 aliens had trained their weapons on Dr. Mai, but she seemed as concerned about this as she might be about a change in the weather. Dr. Mai, the Harlan representative said, your reputation precedes you. However, your presence does not deter us from our mission. Stand aside. Oh, I wouldn't dream of deterring you, Dr. Mai replied pleasantly. In fact, I encourage you to proceed to the chamber in question. You may find the experience quite educational. Something in her tone made Lynn's skin crawl. She'd heard that tone before from professors who knew their students were about to make fascinating mistakes. Dr. Mai, what? Go, Lynn, now. The authority in Dr. Mai's voice brooked no argument. Lynn ran. Behind her, she heard the aliens advancing, their heavy footsteps shaking the floor. She reached Chamber 7 Alpha, just as the first alien rounded the corner, and what she saw inside made her heart stop. The armor was gone. No, not gone, waiting. It stood in the center of the chamber, no longer in its display case, arms spread wide in welcome. The lighting had changed too. Instead of the harsh blue glow from before the armor, now emanated a warm golden light that reminded Lynn of sunset over the mountains outside New Seoul. Where is it? The Harlan representative demanded, entering the chamber with its weapon raised. The display case is empty. I can see that, the Vex replied acidly. The question is, the armor moved. Not toward the aliens as they clearly expected. Instead, it turned toward Lynn, and she felt that recognition again stronger this time. Like meeting someone she'd known in a dream. Human. It spoke, and its voice was nothing like what she'd expected. Not mechanical or synthesized, but warm and conversational with the slight accent of someone who'd learned Standard Galactic as a second language. I've been waiting for you for a very long time. The three aliens opened fire simultaneously. What happened next would be debated by xenobiologists and military tacticians for decades. The armor didn't dodge, didn't activate any visible shields, didn't even move. The energy blasts simply ceased to exist when they reached a point approximately 1 meter from the armor's surface. Not absorbed, not deflected, simply gone as if they'd never been fired at all. Impressive, the third alien said, and now Lynn could hear something like respect in its voice. But raw defensive capabilities are not sufficient. I am Caxtar of the Hegemony Collective. I have studied every known Elder technology for 30 years. You will... The armor raised one hand, fingers spread, and Caxtar stopped speaking. Not by choice, Lynn realized. The alien was simply frozen in place, held by some invisible force that had caught it mid-sentence. I appreciate your dedication to research, the armor said conversationally. But you've made a fundamental error in your studies. Elder technology doesn't respond to commands. It responds to partnership. Partnership, Lynn managed to say. The helm turned toward her again, and she saw her reflection in its smooth surface. But in the reflection, she looked different. More confident. More like the person she'd dreamed of becoming as a child. Lynn Nguyen, the armor said, and hearing her name spoken by something that shouldn't exist sent shivers down her spine. Born February 15th, 2397 in New Solterra. Graduate degree in xenobiology from the Seoul Institute of Technology. Former applicant to the Council Exploration Corps application withdrawn. Current occupation museum security guard, a position you consider temporary, despite holding it for 3 years.
How do you...
I've been watching you, the armor said simply. Every day for 3 years you've walked past my chamber. Do you know what I've observed? Lynn shook her head, not trusting her voice. You're the only person who's never tried to activate me.
I don't understand.
Politicians, generals, scientists, explorers. They all come here for the same reason. They want to wear me. They want my power. They see a weapon, a tool, a trophy. The armor stepped toward her, and she noticed that it moved with perfect human proportions, as if it had been designed for her specifically. But you've looked at me, nodded politely, and continued with your rounds. You've never once wondered what it would be like to command the power of the elders. Because I'm not important enough, Lynn said automatically. I'm just a security guard. No, the armor said firmly. Because you understand something that all those ambitious souls do not power, should not be sought. It should be accepted when necessary, and given up when possible. The frozen aliens were struggling against their invisible constraints now, and Lynn could hear more footsteps in the corridor outside. This was escalating far beyond anything her security training had prepared her for. I don't want power, she said, taking a step backward. I just want to finish my shift and go home and eat noodles and watch holodramas about other people's adventures. I know, the armor said, and somehow it managed to sound fond. That's exactly why I chose you. Before Lynn could object further, the chamber filled with additional hostile figures. Looking through the doorway, she could see a small war taking place in the museum's main hall. Apparently, word of the armor's awakening had spread, and every power with any stake in Elder technology had decided tonight was the night to claim their prize. This is becoming complicated. Dr. Mai's voice came from the chamber's comm system. Lynn, I'm afraid we're about to have company from several more factions. The museum's shields are down and I count at least 7 ships in orbit. Dr. Mai Lin called out, "What's really going on here, and don't tell me this is a coincidence." There was a pause. The anniversary celebration was a convenient cover. Every major power has been planning to make a move on the armor tonight. What they didn't plan for was the armor making its own move first. The armor Caliburn, she reminded herself, stepped closer to the chamber's exit. "The museum is compromised. We need to leave." Lin squeaked. "You and I," Caliburn said, matter-of-factly. "Unless you'd prefer to stay here and be captured by one of several galactic powers, all of whom would very much like to know why I chose you." Another group of armed figures appeared in the corridor, these wearing the distinctive yellow armor of the Kantari Military Alliance. They spotted the group in the chamber and immediately opened fire. Caliburn moved. Lin had seen combat footage, had watched recordings of the galaxy's greatest warriors in action. None of it compared to what she witnessed in the next 30 seconds. Caliburn didn't just fight, it danced. Every movement was precise, graceful, economical. Energy blasts were deflected with casual gestures. Hostile troops were immobilized with waves of the armor's hand, and somehow, impossibly, no one was seriously hurt. When the corridor was clear again, filled with groaning but still living aliens in various stages of unconsciousness or temporal paralysis, Caliburn turned back to Lin. "We really should go now." "I can't just leave," Lin protested. "This is my job. These are priceless artifacts." "They'll be safer if we're not here," Dr. Mai's voice crackled through the comm. "Lin, there's an emergency transport in sub-level 3. The museum's AI will guide you." "Doctor, are you coming with us?" Another pause. "I'm afraid I have my own way out, and my own responsibilities. But Lin, take care of each other." The comm went dead. "Sub-level 3, Caliburn repeated. "Shall we—" Lin looked around the chamber one more time. 3 hours ago, her biggest worry had been staying awake until her shift ended. Now, she was apparently expected to— what saved the galaxy? Run away with a legendary artifact? She wasn't qualified for any of this. "I don't know how to be a hero," she said quietly. "Neither do I," Caliburn replied. "But I know how to protect what's worth protecting. And right now, that includes you." More footsteps in the corridor. More weapons charging. More voices calling out orders in a dozen different languages. "All right," Lin said, surprising herself again. "Let's go." They made their way through the museum's service corridors, following routes that the building's AI helpfully illuminated on wall panels. Behind them, Lin could hear the sounds of a full-scale battle erupting in the main galleries. She tried not to think about the damage being done to centuries of carefully preserved history. "Can I ask you something?" she said as they descended a maintenance ladder toward sub-level 3. "Of course. What exactly are you— I mean, I know you're elder technology, but are you a weapon, a tool, a person?" Caliburn was quiet for several rungs. "I'm not sure I understand the distinction you're making. Among my creators, technology and biology were more intertwined than your species is comfortable with. I was made to protect and preserve knowledge to ensure that wisdom was not lost when its keepers died. You might say I'm a librarian. The most dangerous librarian in the galaxy. The most necessary," Caliburn corrected gently. "Knowledge without protection is soon lost. Protection without knowledge is mere violence." They reached sub-level 3 to find a sleek transport ship waiting in a hidden hangar that Lin had never known existed. The vessel was definitely not of human design. Its organic curves and bioluminescent panels marked it as elder technology, impossibly ancient, yet somehow looking brand new. "How long has this been here?" Lin wondered. "Since the museum was built," Caliburn replied. "Dr. Mai and I have been planning for this day for some time." "Dr. Mai, you mean she knew you were aware?" "Dr. Mai has known many things about me that others have not. She's one of the few researchers who understood that studying elder technology requires permission from the technology itself." As they boarded the ship, Lin felt a strange sensation, like stepping through a field of static electricity. When she looked down, she gasped. Her clothing had changed. Instead of her simple security uniform, she now wore a form-fitting suit that seemed to be made of the same material as Caliburn, complete with bioluminescent circuits that pulsed in rhythm with the armor. "What just happened?" "The ship recognized our partnership," Caliburn explained. "It's adapting you to its systems. Don't worry, the process is perfectly safe." Our partnership, Lynn, sat heavily in one of the ship's chairs, which molded itself to her body with unsettling responsiveness. "I never agreed to a partnership." "You're here, aren't you?" Before she could argue further, the ship's systems activated around them. Displays flickered to life, showing external views of the museum, and what Lynn saw made her stomach drop. The ancient Galactic Artifacts Museum was surrounded by more than a dozen ships representing every major power in the galaxy. Energy weapons were being fired at the building's shields, which were starting to flicker under the assault. "They're destroying it," she whispered. "They're trying to," Caliburn agreed. "But the museum's defenses are stronger than they appear." Dr. Mai and the architects made sure of that. As if to demonstrate the point, the museum's shields suddenly flared brilliant white, and several of the attacking ships were pushed back by invisible force fields. "Still," Caliburn continued, "remaining here would not be wise. Where shall we go?" "I don't know," Lynn exploded. "I don't know where to go. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I don't know why you picked me. I'm not special. I'm not brave. I'm not smart. I just wanted a quiet job and a quiet life." The ship's engines hummed to life, but they didn't move. Instead, Caliburn's voice became gentler, almost paternal. "Lynn Nguyen, 3 years ago you prevented a bomb from detonating in the museum's East Wing. You identified an explosive device disguised as a historical recreation, and you evacuated 300 visitors before calling for security. Do you remember what you told the investigating officer when he asked how you knew?" Lynn frowned. It just looked wrong, out of place. "A device created by some of the galaxy's most skilled infiltrators, designed to fool the museum's sophisticated scanning systems. But you saw through it because you paid attention to details that everyone else considered insignificant. That was just luck." "Was it also luck when you noticed that the atmospheric processor in Section 7 was making unusual noises 2 weeks before it would have failed and potentially killed dozens of researchers?" Lynn had no answer for that. "Or when you caught the data theft in the archives by noticing that someone was accessing files in an unusual pattern?" I notice things," she said quietly. "Yes," Caliburn agreed. "You do. And what you don't realize is that noticing things, really paying attention to the world around you, is one of the rarest and most valuable skills in the galaxy. Do you know how many brilliant scientists, master warriors, and influential politicians have walked past my chamber? A lot. Thousands. And not one of them noticed that I was always slightly warm, that my posture shifted minutely when certain people approached, that the dust never settled on my surface the same way it did on other artifacts. You noticed. On your first day." Lynn remembered that. She'd almost mentioned it to her supervisor, but had decided it wasn't worth the paperwork. "That's why I chose you," Caliburn continued. "Not because you're the strongest or the smartest or the most ambitious. Because you see what others miss. Because you care about things that others overlook. Because when given power, your first instinct is to question whether you deserve it." The ship shuddered slightly as one of the attacking vessels fired in their direction. Their shields held easily, but the message was clear. They were running out of time to sit and talk. "So," Caliburn said, "where shall we go? I have several suggestions, but this partnership requires your input." Lynn took a deep breath. "You mentioned that your purpose is to protect knowledge. What knowledge?" "The knowledge of my creators. The elder races left behind more than just artifacts. They left behind warnings, instruction in how to avoid the mistakes that led to their disappearance, information that could help the current galactic civilization avoid similar catastrophes." "And you think someone's going to try to suppress that information?" "I know they will. Several someones, in fact. The current power structure of the galaxy depends on certain truths remaining hidden." Lynn thought about this. Then we need to get that information to someone who can use it responsibly. Exactly, but who? It was a good question. The Galactic Council was compromised, that much was clear from the faction war currently raging outside the museum. The academic community couldn't protect itself from political pressure. The military would weaponize anything useful and classify the rest. What about other humans? She asked. Earth's government maintains some independence from the Council. A possibility. But there are other options as well. The neutral zone contains several research stations that operate outside Council authority. And there are rumors of elder sites in the outer galaxy, automated installations that might be able to preserve the knowledge regardless of what happens to us. Us, Lynn repeated. You keep saying us like we're a team. Aren't we? She looked at Caliburn. Really looked at it for the first time since this whole impossible night had begun. The armor was definitely looking back at her, and in its featureless helm, she somehow saw patience, hope, and something that might have been loneliness. How long have you been alone? She asked quietly. By your calendar, approximately 73 million years, 241,000 days, 16 hours, and 37 minutes. Not that I was counting. The joke was so unexpected that Lynn actually laughed. You have a sense of humor. My creators valued humor. They said it was a sign of intelligence and emotional resilience. What were they like, your creators? Curious, compassionate, deeply flawed. Not unlike humans actually, though, they'd reached a level of technological integration that your species finds uncomfortable. They made mistakes, terrible mistakes that cost them everything. But they learned from those mistakes and they tried to ensure others wouldn't repeat them. The ship's proximity alarms chose that moment to activate. Through the displays, Lynn could see one of the attacking vessels moving toward their hangar. It was painted in the distinctive black and gold of the Hegemony Collective. Caxtar's people, Caliburn observed. They're persistent. Can we outrun them? This ship can outrun anything in the galaxy. But running isn't a long-term solution. Lynn was about to respond when a new voice crackled through the ship's communication system. It was Dr. Mai, but she sounded strained and tired. Caliburn, Lynn, if you're receiving this, you need to get to Nexus Station immediately. Things are worse than we thought. Dr. Mai, Lynn called out. Are you all right? Where are you? I'm safe for now. But I've learned something important. The faction war outside isn't random. It's coordinated. Someone's been manipulating the different powers, convincing them that capturing the Caliburn armor tonight is crucial to their survival. Manipulating them how, Caliburn asked. By telling them the truth about the elder races. Or part of it anyway. Enough to make them desperate. The attacking ship was getting closer. Lynn could see figures in environmental suits, gathering near what looked like a cutting laser designed to breach the hangar's outer door. We need to go, she said. Agreed, Caliburn replied. Dr. Mai, we're leaving for Nexus Station now. What will we find there? Answers, I hope, and probably trouble. The station's administrator is an old friend, Officer Ken of the Council Peacekeepers. He's skeptical of official Council policy regarding elder technology. Is there anyone in this galaxy who isn't involved in some kind of conspiracy? Lynn asked, as the ship's engines spooled up to full power. Very few, Dr. Mai replied dryly. Safe travels, you two. And Lynn, don't let the armor do all the thinking. It needs a human perspective to function properly. The communication cut off just as the outer door exploded inward. Through the breach came a squad of Hegemony soldiers, their weapons trained on the elder ship. Too late, their leader called out in heavily accented standard. Surrender the armor, and your death will be quick. Lynn looked at Caliburn. Can you do that thing you did in the museum? The freezing thing? Not from inside the ship. The hull blocks most of my external projections. Then I guess we're doing this the hard way. She moved toward the ship's control systems, which had helpfully reconfigured themselves into something resembling human controls. Her new outfit, she noticed, was making the interface more intuitive than it should have been. Lynn, Caliburn said carefully. Do you know how to pilot a spacecraft? No, she replied, activating what she hoped was the launch sequence. "But I know how to drive a hoverbike, and I once took a semester of aerodynamics. How different could it be?" The ship shot out of the hangar like a bullet from a gun, accelerating so rapidly that Lynn was pressed back into her chair despite the inertial dampeners. Behind them, the hegemony soldiers scrambled for cover as the ship's exhaust incinerated the floor where they'd been standing. "Different," Lynn gasped as they burst through the museum's outer shields and into open space. "Very, very different." But to her amazement, she was actually flying the ship. The controls responded to her intentions as much as her movements, and the outfit she wore seemed to be feeding her information about the ship's status directly into her nervous system. It was overwhelming and exhilarating and absolutely terrifying. Space around the museum was chaos. More than 20 ships were engaged in a complex three-way battle with factions forming and dissolving based on momentary tactical advantages. Energy weapons lit up the void like a festival fireworks display, and Lynn had to dodge between two Vex destroyers to avoid being caught in their crossfire. "How do I get to Nexus Station from here?" she called out over the sound of weapons fire. "Set course for the neutral zone," Caliburn directed. "The ship's navigation system will calculate the optimal route." Lynn's hands moved over the controls, surprised to find that she somehow knew which ones to use. Information flowed into her mind. Star charts, political boundaries, safe passage routes. The partnership with Caliburn was deeper than she'd realized. They cleared Earth orbit and jumped to hyperspace just as one of the Harlan warships moved to intercept them. As the stars elongated into lines around them, Lynn finally allowed herself to breathe. "That was either very brave or very stupid," she said. "Both," Caliburn agreed. "Welcome to your new life, Lynn Nguyen." The journey to Nexus Station took 6 hours of hyperspace travel, during which Lynn learned several important things about her situation. First, the outfit that the ship had given her wasn't just clothing, it was an interface system that allowed her to communicate with elder technology more effectively. Second, Caliburn was capable of providing her with information and skills she didn't possess, but it couldn't think for her or make decisions for her. And third, she was beginning to experience what Caliburn called sensory expansion. "What exactly does that mean?" she asked, as they dropped out of hyperspace near Nexus Station. "Your perception is being enhanced. You'll notice details you missed before, spot patterns that weren't obvious, sense emotional states and others more clearly. It's not mind reading, more like having a very sophisticated intuition." Lynn was about to respond when she got her first good look at Nexus Station, and all thoughts of enhanced perception fled her mind. The station was massive, a sprawling complex of interconnected spheres and cylinders that looked like it had been grown rather than built. Ship docks jutted out from its surface like metal flowers, and running lights traced patterns across its hull that reminded Lynn of neural networks. What made it truly impressive, though, was its population. The station was home to representatives of every major species in the galaxy, plus several that Lynn didn't recognize.
It's beautiful, she breathed.
"It's also heavily armed," Caliburn noted. "Nexus Station maintains its neutrality through significant defensive capabilities." As if to demonstrate this point, their ship was immediately scanned by more than a dozen different sensor arrays. A communication channel opened, and a crisp voice spoke in perfect Standard Galactic. "Unknown vessel, you are approaching Nexus Station restricted space. Identify yourself and state your business." "This is..." Lynn paused, realizing she had no idea what to call their ship. "Tell them we're requesting docking with Officer Ken," Caliburn suggested. "Priority 1, diplomatic status."
"Unknown vessel," the voice repeated. "Respond immediately or be considered hostile."
Nexus Station Control. Lynn said, hoping she sounded more confident than she felt. "This is the ship carrying the Caliburn artifact. We're requesting immediate docking with Officer Ken. Priority 1, diplomatic status." The channel went silent for so long that Lynn began to worry they were about to be fired upon. Then a different voice came through, deeper and more authoritative. Caliburn ship, this is Administrator Ken. Proceed to Docking Bay 7 Alpha, and welcome to Nexus Station. Docking Bay 7 Alpha turned out to be in a restricted section of the station, surrounded by automated defense systems, and accessible only through a series of checkpoints. As they settled onto the landing pad, Lynn noticed that their ship was the only vessel in the entire bay. VIP treatment, she murmured. Or a trap, Caliburn said pragmatically. Stay alert. They were met at the airlock by a single figure in the dark blue uniform of the Council Peacekeepers. Officer Ken for Lynn assumed this was him, was tall and lean with the scaled skin and reptilian features of the saurian species. His badge indicated he held the rank of senior administrator, and the weapon at his side looked well used. Dr. Mai sends her regards, he said without preamble, and her apologies for dragging you into this mess. What mess exactly? Lynn asked. Ken gestured for them to follow him. Walk with me, and forgive the security measures, but what I'm about to show you must not become public knowledge. They passed through several more checkpoints, each staffed by peacekeepers from different species. Lynn noticed that each guard's eyes lingered on Caliburn with obvious recognition, and perhaps a touch of fear. They know what you are, she said quietly. Some do, Caliburn confirmed. News travels fast in the neutral zone. Officer Ken led them through the station's main concourse, a massive circular chamber with shops, restaurants, and relaxation areas catering to dozens of different species. The diversity of beings here was staggering. Lynn spotted at least 15 species she could identify, and several more she couldn't. Nexus Station was built as a neutral meeting ground, Ken explained as they walked. No government ownership, no military presence except for peacekeepers, no restrictions on trade or information exchange. In theory. And in practice, Lynn asked. In practice, it's become a place where the galaxy's power brokers come to conduct business they can't do in their own territory, including business involving elder technology. They entered a secured lift that carried them deep into the station's interior. When the doors opened, Lynn found herself looking into what could only be described as a command center. Holographic displays showed star charts, ship movements, communication intercepts, and data streams from across the galaxy. Welcome, Ken said, to the unofficial headquarters of the people who are trying to prevent a galactic war. I thought the Galactic Council prevented wars, Lynn said. The Galactic Council is part of the problem, Ken replied grimly. He activated one of the displays, showing a timeline filled with incidents, territorial disputes, and escalating tensions. For the past 5 years, conflicts between major powers have been steadily increasing. Trade wars, border skirmishes, political assassinations, technological theft. Each incident by itself could be explained as normal interspecies tensions. But taken together, Caliburn asked. Taken together, they form a pattern. Someone has been manipulating galactic politics, engineering conflicts, positioning the major powers against each other. Another display activated showing ship movements around various council worlds. Lynn recognized some of the vessel configurations from the battle at the museum. Tonight's attack on the museum was the culmination of months of preparation, Ken continued. Each faction was convinced that their rivals were planning to seize the Caliburn armor, and that failing to act first would mean being left behind in some new arms race. But that's not why they really wanted it, Lynn realized. They wanted it because someone told them about the Elder warnings, about whatever caused the Elder races to disappear. Exactly, Ken looked impressed. Dr. Mai said you were perceptive. What kind of warnings are we talking about? Lynn asked. The command center fell silent, except for the hum of electronics. Ken and Caliburn seemed to be having some kind of unspoken exchange. Show her, Caliburn said finally. Ken nodded and activated a new set of displays. What Lynn saw made her feel cold in spite of the station's warm atmosphere. The Elder races didn't disappear, Ken said quietly. They were destroyed by something they created. The displays showed star charts spanning millions of years tracking the expansion and sudden contraction of elder civilization. Whole sectors of space that had once teemed with life now showed nothing but dead worlds and artificial gravity wells. They developed technology that allowed them to manipulate the fundamental forces of reality, Caliburn explained. Creation and destruction on a scale that your species can't yet imagine, and they lost control of it. The warnings I carry, Caliburn continued, are instructions on how to recognize the signs that a civilization is approaching the same threshold, how to avoid the mistakes that led to the Elders' destruction. And someone doesn't want those warnings to become public, Lynn said. Several someones actually, Ken confirmed. Because the warnings make it clear that the galactic civilization is currently heading down the same path. Lynn sank into one of the command center's chairs, trying to process this information. So, the factions attacking the museum weren't just after a powerful weapon. They were after proof that their entire way of life is doomed. They were after the ability to control that proof, Caliburn corrected. To use it as leverage against their enemies, or to suppress it if it threatened their power. But they don't have it, Ken said with satisfaction. You do. The weight of that statement hit Lynn like a physical blow. I'm not qualified to. This is too big for me. Yes, it is, Caliburn agreed, matter-of-factly. It's too big for any one person, which is why we need allies. And why you're here, Ken added. Nexus Station has been quietly gathering people who understand the magnitude of the threat. Researchers, peacekeepers, independent captains, even some council members who haven't been compromised. We're not trying to rule the galaxy, we're trying to save it. By doing what? By making sure the Elder warnings reach the right people. By preventing the technology race that's already starting. By finding ways to change course before it's too late. Alarms began sounding throughout the command center. One of the peacekeepers at a monitoring station called out, "Administrator Ken, we have multiple ships dropping out of hyperspace. Harlan Ascendancy Vex Imperium, and at least 3 other factions. They're demanding that we surrender the Caliburn artifact." How did they find us so quickly? Lynn asked. The same way we've been tracking their movements, Ken replied grimly. There are very few secrets in the galaxy anymore. All precinct commanders. This is a Code 7 alert. Full defensive positions. Throughout Nexus Station, Lynn could hear the sound of blast doors sealing and weapon systems powering up. The displays showed the approaching fleets, more ships than had been at the museum, arranged in a coordinated assault formation. They're really willing to start a war over this, she said. They think they already are at war, Caliburn observed. The question is whether we can show them they're fighting the wrong enemy. Options, Ken asked his staff. Our defenses can hold them off temporarily, one of the peacekeepers reported. But if they're willing to take casualties, they'll overwhelm us eventually. We could evacuate the civilian population and destroy the station, another suggested. Deny them any strategic value. And leave 500,000 sentients homeless, Ken said sharply. Not acceptable. There is another option, Caliburn said quietly. Everyone in the command center turned toward the armor. A demonstration. What kind of demonstration? Lynn asked, though she had a sinking feeling she already knew. The attacking fleets are here because their leaders believe that whoever controls me controls the future of galactic civilization. Perhaps it's time to show them what that future actually looks like. The arena, Ken said, understanding immediately. You want to invoke the right of trial by combat. Wait, Lynn interrupted. Trial by combat. What is this? The ancient history of human medieval warfare. Many species maintain ancient customs regarding the settlement of disputes, Ken explained. The right of trial by combat is recognized under Nexus Station's charter. Any faction can demand that disputes be settled through single combat between champions, with the winner gaining the right to state their case before a neutral tribunal. You want me to fight someone? Lynn's voice came out as a squeak. Not just someone, Caliburn said. Representatives of every major faction that claims the right to possess me. In the arena. Before witnesses from every species in the galaxy. The command center's displays suddenly showed incoming communication requests from more than a dozen ships. Ken accepted them all simultaneously, and the air above the central table filled with holographic representations of faction leaders, military commanders, and ambassadors. Nexus Station. One of them began a Harlan general, whose translator made her voice sound like grinding stone. Surrender the stolen Elder artifact immediately, or face the consequences. The artifact was not stolen, Ken replied calmly. It chose its bearer according to its own criteria. A human security guard, a Vex commander, laughed, the sound like steam escaping from a boiler. The armor clearly malfunctioned. We demand that— I demand nothing, Caliburn interrupted, speaking through the ship's communication system. Every hologram flickered as the Elder technology interfaced with their systems. I am not a weapon to be claimed, or a tool to be used. I am a guardian of knowledge, and I have chosen my partner according to my own judgment. The various faction representatives began speaking at once, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of outraged demands and threats. Ken gestured for silence, but it was Caliburn who achieved it. Every display in the command center suddenly showed the same image, a star system in the process of destroying itself. Suns collapsed into black holes, planets cracked apart under impossible stresses, space itself seemed to tear and bleed energy. This, Caliburn said, is what happened to the last civilization that fought over Elder technology. The Zephyrian Empire, 3 million years ago. They were no less intelligent than the current galactic powers, no less certain that they could control forces beyond their understanding. The images shifted, showing world after world, reduced to lifeless rock and swirling energy clouds. The knowledge I carry includes the warnings they ignored, the mistakes they made, the signs they failed to recognize. Your current civilization stands at the same crossroads. The faction leaders had gone silent, staring at the images with expressions ranging from skepticism to horror. You claim the right to possess me because you believe I will give you an advantage over your enemies, Caliburn continued. But I am not a weapon. I am a teacher. And the first lesson I offer is this: the greatest threat to galactic civilization is not any external enemy. It is the belief that power can be safely hoarded, that knowledge can be safely suppressed, that any one group can control the future of trillions. Pretty words, the Vex commander sneered. But words don't change the balance of power. Surrender the artifact or we will take it. Very well, Caliburn said. I invoke the right of trial by combat as recognized under the Nexus Station Charter and the Ancient Accords. Any faction that wishes to claim me may send a champion to face mine. The winner will have the right to state their case before a full tribunal of neutral species. And if your champion loses, the Harlan general asked, then I will submit to whatever decision the tribunal makes regarding my disposition. Lynn realized that every eye in the command center was now on her. What if I don't want to be a champion? Then you don't have to be, Caliburn said gently. This is your choice, Lynn Nguyen, no one else's. But if I say no, you'll still have to face whatever the tribunal decides. Yes. And if I say yes, I have to fight trained warriors from the most powerful military forces in the galaxy. Yes. How is that fair? It isn't, Caliburn admitted. But fairness is not always the most important consideration. Sometimes what matters most is whether the right point of view is represented. Lynn looked around the command center at the faces of people from a dozen different species, all watching her with mixtures of hope, fear, and anticipation. Then she looked at the holographic displays still showing the destroyed Zephyrian worlds. If I do this, she said slowly, and somehow manage not to get killed immediately, what happens then? Then you speak, Ken said, before a tribunal of neutral species with representatives from every faction present. You share what you've learned. You present the Elder warnings. You help decide the future of galactic civilization. No pressure, Lynn muttered. I won't lie to you, Caliburn said. The odds are not favorable. You would be facing warriors who have trained their entire lives for combat. You have been chosen for very different qualities.
But you think I can win?
I think you can do what needs to be done. The distinction was important, and Lin understood it. This wasn't about winning a fight. It was about demonstrating something that couldn't be communicated through words alone.
All right,
she said, surprising herself yet again. I'll do it, but I want something in return.
Name it,
Ken said immediately. When this is over, however it ends, I want guarantees that the knowledge in Caliburn will be preserved and made available to everyone. No more hoarding, no more suppression. If we're going to save galactic civilization, it has to be a group effort.
Agreed.
Several of the faction leaders said simultaneously, then looked surprised at their unanimity. The arena will be prepared, Ken announced. Combat will begin in 6 hours, allowing time for each faction to select and transport their champions. Are there any objections to these terms?
Apparently there weren't, because the holographic representatives began winking out, one by one, as the faction leaders ended their communications to begin preparations.
6 hours, Lin said when the command center was quiet again. What do I do for 6 hours?
Learn, Caliburn replied. Train, prepare. I don't know how to fight,
but you do know how to think, and you do know how to survive. And now, you'll learn how to do both while working with me. The next 6 hours were the most intense of Lin's life. Caliburn didn't just provide her with combat skills. It integrated with her nervous system, becoming an extension of her body and mind. The process was overwhelming at first, like trying to learn a new language, walk and breathe all at the same time. But gradually, she began to understand. Caliburn wasn't just armor. It was a symbiotic system designed to enhance the natural abilities of its wearer. It could make her faster, stronger, more perceptive, but it couldn't replace her judgment, her compassion, or her essentially human way of seeing the world. The warriors you'll face, Caliburn explained, as they practiced in one of the station's training facilities, will try to overpower you, outmaneuver you, outwit you. They will assume that superior training and experience will be enough. Won't it be? Lin asked, ducking under a holographic opponent's energy sword, and countering with a move that Caliburn had just taught her.
Only if we fight the kind of battle they expect. But there are other kinds of battle. Remember, you're not trying to defeat them. You're trying to demonstrate something.
Demonstrate what exactly? That the future doesn't belong to whoever can claim the most power. That wisdom is more valuable than strength. That cooperation achieves more than domination.
How am I supposed to demonstrate that by fighting?
By not fighting the way they expect. As the hours passed, Lin began to understand what Caliburn meant. The skills it shared with her weren't just about combat. They were about reading situations, finding unexpected solutions, turning disadvantages into advantages. She learned to move with the armor, as if she'd worn it her entire life, to sense the intentions of opponents, before they acted, to see patterns and possibilities that others missed. But more importantly, she began to understand the partnership itself. Caliburn wasn't controlling her, it was amplifying her. Her natural curiosity became enhanced pattern recognition. Her tendency to notice details became tactical awareness. Her empathy became the ability to understand opponents well enough to predict their actions. 1 hour to combat, Ken announced over the facility's speakers. Lin sat down on the training room floor, breathing heavily. I'm as ready as I'll ever be. How do you feel? Caliburn asked.
Terrified, excited, still convinced this is a terrible idea. She paused. But also, right. Like this is what I'm supposed to be doing.
That feeling is important. Trust it. Caliburn, can I ask you something that's been bothering me?
Of course.
You said you've been alone for 73 million years. How do you deal with that kind of isolation?
The armor was quiet for a long moment. I remember my creators, their hopes and fears. I remember the worlds they built and the mistakes they made. I remember the lessons they learned too late. And I hold on to the belief that someday, someone would be worthy of sharing that memory.
And you think I'm worthy?
I think you're human, Caliburn replied.
which may be the same thing. The arena at Nexus Station was unlike anything Lynn had ever seen. Built into the station's central hub, it was a massive spherical chamber with seating for tens of thousands of spectators from dozens of different species. The fighting space in the center could be reconfigured to simulate different environments, and force fields protected the audience from stray weapons fire. As Lynn entered through the competitor's entrance, she was struck by the diversity of the crowd. Saurians sat next to Centaurans. Vex shared refreshments with Harlan, and in the premium seating area, she spotted representatives from species she didn't even recognize. Word of the trial by combat had spread throughout the galaxy with astonishing speed. "Nervous?" Caliburn asked. "Beyond words," Lynn replied. "How many people are watching?" "Approximately 2.5 million in the arena itself. An estimated 40 billion more through live broadcast across the galaxy." "No pressure," she muttered for the second time that day. The other champions were already assembled on the arena floor, and Lynn's enhanced senses immediately categorized them as extremely dangerous. There was a Harlan warrior in ceremonial battle armor that looked like it could stop a starship torpedo. A Vex combat droid with more weapons than Lynn could count. A being she didn't recognize that seemed to be made of living crystal and energy. A massive Centauran whose 4 arms each carried a different type of weapon. And at least 6 others, each representing a different faction's interpretation of ultimate combat prowess. Ladies, gentlemen, and beings of all classifications. A voice boomed across the arena. "Welcome to Nexus Station's trial by combat conducted under the authority of the Ancient Accords and witnessed by representatives of every major galactic civilization." The speaker was a neutral zone administrator, floating above the arena in a gravity-nullified observation pod. The dispute at hand concerns the proper disposition of the Elder Artifact, known as Caliburn. Each champion represents a different faction's interpretation of how this artifact should be controlled. Lynn stepped into the center of the arena alongside the other champions. Up close, they looked even more formidable. The Harlan warrior was at least 2 meters tall and looked like she could crush a building with her bare hands. The Vex droid's optical sensors tracked Lynn's movement with mechanical precision. The crystal being emanated an aura of barely contained energy that made Lynn's teeth itch. The trial will consist of individual combat between the Caliburn bearer and each faction champion in succession, the administrator continued. Victory conditions are established by the champions themselves. Combat continues until one participant yields, is incapacitated, or withdraws. Lethal force is discouraged but not forbidden. "Discouraged but not forbidden," Lynn repeated under her breath. "That's comforting." "Combat will begin in 60 seconds, the administrator announced. "Champions, prepare yourselves." The Harlan warrior stepped forward first. "Human," she said in heavily accented standard, "I am Battle Leader Thexna of the 7th Expeditionary Force. I have conquered worlds and led armadas. Surrender the artifact now, and I will make your defeat swift." "I appreciate the offer," Lynn replied, "but I'm afraid I'll have to decline." Thexna drew a weapon that looked like a cross between a sword and a chainsaw. "So be it. Begin," the administrator declared. Thexna charged with the speed of a freight train and the subtlety of a nuclear explosion. Her weapon screamed through the air toward Lynn's head, trailing energy that left afterimages in the air. Lynn moved out of the way. Not elegantly, not with any particular skill or grace, just enough to avoid being cut in half. Thexna's weapon passed through the space where Lynn had been standing and carved a furrow in the arena floor that glowed with residual heat. "Stand still and fight!" Thexna roared, reversing her swing. "Why?" Lynn asked, genuinely puzzled, as she stepped around the attack. "That seems counterproductive." This was apparently not the response Thexna had expected. The Harlan warrior's attacks became more aggressive, more powerful, but also more predictable. She was fighting the battle she knew how to fight, overwhelming her opponent with superior force and skill. But Lynn, guided by Caliburn's enhanced awareness, began to see the pattern. Every attack telegraphed the next, every movement created an opening. And more importantly, she began to understand something about her opponent. Thexana wasn't just trying to win. She was trying to prove something to the watching galaxy, to her own people, to herself. She needed to demonstrate that Harlan's strength and honor were sufficient to claim any prize. "You're fighting yourself," Lin said, dodging another massive swing. "Not me." "What?" Thexana paused, confused. "You're fighting the battle you think you should fight, not the battle that's actually happening. Speak sense, human. You want the Elder Artifact because you believe it will make the Harlan ascendancy stronger. But what if making anyone power stronger is exactly the problem?" Thexana's next attack was half-hearted, her attention split between the fight and Lin's words. "You know nothing of our struggle for survival. I know that struggling for survival and struggling for dominance aren't the same thing." For the first time since the combat began, Lin went on the offensive. But instead of trying to overpower the Harlan warrior, she used Caliburn's capabilities to do something unexpected. Energy surrounded her form, not as a weapon, but as a projection system, and suddenly the arena was filled with holographic images. The images showed worlds throughout Harlan space, not the military installations or industrial complexes that dominated their news broadcasts, but the agricultural planets where families farmed in peace. The research stations where scientists studied stellar phenomena, the art colonies where Harlan culture flourished. "This is what you're really fighting for," Lin said as the images swirled around them. "Not conquest, not dominance. This." Thexana lowered her weapon, staring at the images. "How did you—" Caliburn contains the accumulated knowledge of the elder races, including their records of every major galactic civilization that has risen and fallen, including yours. The images shifted, showing the Harlan ascendancy's possible futures, some where endless expansion led to the same fate as the Zephyrians, others where cooperation and restraint led to a golden age of art, science, and culture. "The artifact doesn't belong to any one faction," Lin continued, "because the knowledge it contains belongs to everyone. The Elder warnings aren't just about avoiding destruction, they're about finding better ways to live." Thexana stood in the center of the holographic display, looking at the faces of her own people, farmers, artists, scientists, children. When she spoke again, her voice was quiet, but clear enough to carry to every corner of the arena. "I yield." A collective gasp rose from the crowd. On the arena floor, the other champions looked stunned. But before anyone could react, the Vex combat droid stepped forward. Emotional manipulation. It declared its voice artificially modulated for maximum intimidation. Ineffective against Vex protocols. The droid was different from Thexana in every possible way. Where the Harlan warrior had fought with passion and honor, the droid was precise, calculating, relentless. Its multiple arms moved independently, each wielding a different weapon, creating a storm of energy blasts and projectiles that filled the air around Lin. But there was something else different about this fight. Lin was beginning to understand how to work with Caliburn, how to blend her human instincts with elder technology. She found herself moving in ways that seemed impossible, her body bending and flowing like liquid while remaining solid enough to deflect weapons fire. "Interesting," the droid observed, adjusting its attack patterns in real time. "Adaptive capabilities detected. Increasing force parameters." The assault intensified, but so did Lin's understanding. She wasn't just dodging anymore, she was dancing, weaving between attacks with a grace that had the crowd holding its breath. And as she moved, she began to see what she'd missed before. "You're not trying to win either," she called out, ducking under an energy beam that would have vaporized her head. "You're trying to prove that Vex technology is superior." "Vex technology is superior," the droid replied, launching a barrage of micro-missiles. "Victory is irrelevant. Data is paramount." "Then let me give you some data." Lin stopped moving. The sudden change caught the droid off guard for a fraction of a second, long enough for Lin to do something that surprised everyone in the arena, including herself. She reached out with her Caliburn-enhanced senses and touched the droid's central processing core. What happened next defied every law of technology that the galaxy understood. For a brief moment, the boundaries between organic and artificial intelligence, between elder technology and Vex engineering, simply ceased to exist. Information flowed both ways. Lynn saw the galaxy through the droid's sensors, while the droid experienced human emotion and intuition for the first time in its existence. In that moment of connection, they shared something that neither had expected: wonder. The droid experienced the sunset over Earth's oceans, the taste of synthetic noodles, the simple pleasure of a job well done. Lynn experienced the perfect logic of mathematical equations, the satisfaction of optimal efficiency, the beauty of technological elegance. When the connection broke, both of them staggered backward. The droid's weapons remained active, but lowered its optical sensors, focused on Lynn, with something that looked like recognition. "Fascinating," it said quietly. "I had not considered the possibility of synthesis. The elder races didn't distinguish between technology and biology the way we do." Lynn explained, still reeling from the connection. To them, consciousness was consciousness regardless of its substrate. The droid was silent for a long moment, processing this information. Around the arena, the crowd was completely silent, sensing that they were witnessing something unprecedented. "The Vex seek perfection through integration of all useful technologies," the droid said, finally. "But we have never considered emotional algorithms, intuitive processing." It paused. "Perhaps our definition of useful technology is incomplete." "I yield," it declared, powering down its weapons. 2 down, 8 to go. The crystal being stepped forward next, and Lynn immediately sensed that this fight would be different again. Where the Harlan warrior had been passionate, and the Vex droid analytical, this being radiated a kind of cosmic detachment that made her skin crawl. "I am resonance of distant stars," it said, its voice like the sound of wind chimes in a methane storm. "I speak for the cosmic consciousness. Your primitive mind cannot comprehend." "Let me stop you right there," Lynn interrupted. "You sound like every philosophy student who's ever started a sentence with "mere mortals cannot understand." If you want to fight, fight. If you want to lecture, there's a university down the hall." The crystal being's radiance flickered in what might have been surprise. "You dare?" "I dare lots of things. It's kind of my whole deal lately." Resonance of distant stars, attacked with forces that made the previous battles look like pillow fights. Reality itself seemed to bend around it, gravity shifting time, fluctuating space, folding in ways that made Lynn's eyes water. But as the battle progressed, Lynn realized that Caliburn had been preparing her for exactly this kind of opponent. The armor didn't just protect her from physical attacks, it anchored her to reality itself, keeping her centered while the universe twisted around her. More importantly, it helped her see through the cosmic being's most dangerous weapon, its pretensions. "You're not transcendent," she said as she evaded a beam of pure entropy. "You're just really, really old." "I contain the wisdom of eons," Resonance of Distant Stars replied, summoning a small black hole in the center of the arena. "And I've learned in the last few days what matters most." Lynn gestured, and Caliburn projected new images around the arena, not of grand cosmic vistas or abstract philosophical concepts, but of small moments: a Harlan child learning to read, a Vex scientist discovering something new, 2 Centaurans sharing a meal, a human couple holding hands while watching the stars. "Consciousness isn't about rising above life," Lynn said, as she deflected attacks that existed in dimensions she couldn't even name. "It's about being part of it." The cosmic being's assault faltered. "You seek to diminish the infinite with the finite." "No," Lynn replied. "I'm trying to show you that the infinite is made up of the finite. Every moment, every choice, every small act of kindness or cruelty." She reached out again, not to touch the being's mind, but to share something simpler. The memory of a quiet evening in her apartment, eating noodles and watching the city lights twinkle outside her window. a moment of perfect, ordinary contentment. Resonance of distant stars shuddered its crystalline form, resonating with harmonics that sounded almost like sobs. "I had forgotten," it whispered. "I had forgotten what it was like to be small enough to be happy." "I yield," it said, and its cosmic radiance dimmed to a gentle glow that no longer hurt to look at. The remaining champions were watching Lin with expressions that ranged from confusion to awe to calculation. She'd now faced 3 opponents and hadn't won a single fight in any traditional sense. Instead, she'd connected with them, shown them something they hadn't expected to see, and received their yield through understanding rather than force. The Centauran stepped forward next, all 4 arms, armed with weapons designed for his species' famous speed and agility. But before the administrator could announce the beginning of combat, he holstered his weapons. "I have watched the previous encounters," he said formally. "I believe I understand what is being demonstrated here. The question is not who is strongest, but who is wisest. And I am a warrior. I excel at tactics, strategy, and combat. But wisdom." He gestured toward the yielded champions. "I believe I have already seen greater wisdom today than in my entire military career." He saluted Lin, then stepped back. "I yield before combat begins." That left 6 champions, but something had changed in the arena's atmosphere. The crowd was no longer simply watching a series of battles, they were witnessing a different kind of demonstration entirely. And the remaining champions seemed to sense it. The next challenger was a being whose species Lin didn't recognize, tall, thin, with skin that shifted colors like an oil slick. It carried no visible weapons, but the air around it shimmered with barely contained energy. "I am Nodesinger of the Infinite Collective," it said. "We do not fight for dominance, but for unity. All consciousness should be joined, all minds connected. The artifact will serve this purpose." "By forcing unity?" Lin asked. "By revealing the illusion of separation." The battle that followed was the strangest yet. Nodesinger didn't attack Lin's body. It attacked her sense of individual self. Telepathic assaults tried to dissolve the boundaries of her consciousness, to merge her mind with the collective's shared awareness. But Caliburn had taught her something important. True partnership didn't require the loss of individual identity. As Nodesinger tried to absorb her into its collective consciousness, Lin showed it what she'd learned about cooperation. She projected not her own memories, but shared memories, moments where she and Caliburn had worked together while remaining distinct. The symbiosis they'd achieved wasn't about becoming one entity, but about learning to think and act in harmony while maintaining their separate selves. "Unity doesn't require uniformity," she said, as the telepathic battle raged around them. "You can have billions of voices singing together without them all singing the same note." Nodesinger's assault faltered as it struggled with this concept. The Infinite Collective had always assumed that true unity meant the dissolution of individual consciousness into a greater whole. But what Lin showed, it was something more complex, a unity that celebrated diversity, a connection that preserved independence. "Perhaps," Nodesinger said slowly, "we have misunderstood the nature of harmony." "I yield," it declared, "and offer alliance instead of conquest." 2 more champions stepped forward simultaneously, a pair of beings that seemed to be twins, or possibly 2 halves of the same creature. They moved in perfect synchronization, spoke in unison, and regarded Lin with 4 identical sets of eyes. "We are Alpha and Omega of the binary stars," they said together. "We represent perfect duality and perfect balance." "Let me guess," Lin said. "You think the Elder Artifact should be split between your 2 factions?" "Correct," they replied. "All things exist in balance. Order and chaos, creation and destruction, light and dark. Life and death," Lin added. "Growth and decay, change and preservation." "Exactly. Then you understand why you're wrong." The twins' halves tilted their heads in identical gestures of confusion. "Explain." "Balance doesn't mean splitting things in half. It means finding the dynamic equilibrium that allows both sides to exist and flourish. You can't cut the galaxy in half and call it balanced. The battle with Alpha and Omega was like fighting one person with four bodies. They moved in perfect coordination, attacked from multiple angles simultaneously, and seemed to anticipate each other's actions instinctively. But as the fight progressed, Lin noticed something: their perfect coordination was also a weakness. They were so focused on maintaining balance between themselves that they couldn't adapt to anything truly unexpected. Using Caliburn's enhanced understanding, she began to fight asymmetrically, introducing chaos into their perfectly ordered dance. Not random chaos, but the kind of creative unpredictability that comes from genuine innovation. "You're trying so hard to balance each other," she called out, as she dodged their synchronized assault, "that you've forgotten to balance yourselves with the rest of the universe." To demonstrate, she began to move in harmony with the arena's ambient energy fields, with the subtle vibrations of the space station, with the emotional undertones of the watching crowd. She wasn't just fighting Alpha and Omega, she was dancing with the entire environment. The effect was startling. Instead of the rigid mathematical precision of the twins' movements, Lin's actions flowed like water, like music, like life itself. And gradually, Alpha and Omega's perfect synchronization began to break down as they tried to adapt to something their binary worldview couldn't process. "Balance isn't a static state," Lin said as the twins, halves, stumbled, their coordination compromised. "It's a living process. It requires constant adjustment, constant change, constant growth." Alpha and Omega looked at each other for the first time since the battle began, really looked and seemed to see something they'd missed in their pursuit of perfect symmetry. "We have been incomplete," Alpha admitted. "Seeking balance in isolation," Omega added. "I yield," they said together, but for the first time they didn't speak in perfect unison. There was a slight delay, a small imperfection that somehow made their surrender more real, more personal, more human. That left two champions. The next was a being that hurt to look at directly, not because of brightness or strangeness, but because it seemed to exist partially outside of normal space-time. When it moved, it left afterimages in dimensions that Lin's enhanced senses could perceive, but not quite understand. "I am the echo of endings," it said, and its voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "I represent the final faction, those who know that all civilizations must end." "Cheerful," Lin murmured. "You fight for preservation, for knowledge, for the continuation of galactic civilization. But civilizations are not meant to be eternal. They rise, they flourish, they fall. This is natural. This is necessary." "The elder races fell," Lin pointed out. "Are you saying that was necessary too?" "All things end. The question is whether they end in wisdom or in foolishness." The echo of endings didn't fight like the other champions. It didn't attack or defend in any conventional sense. Instead, it seemed to accelerate entropy around itself, aging metal, causing systems to fail, making the very air grow stale and cold. But more disturbing was its effect on Lin herself. In the presence of the echo, she felt the weight of mortality, of impermanence, of the inevitable end of all things. Her muscles grew heavy, her thoughts sluggish, as if the very concept of ending was draining her life force. "You feel it, don't you?" the echo said, moving closer. "The futility of struggle, the certainty of dissolution. Why fight for something that cannot last?" Lin found herself nodding, the despair seeping into her bones. What was the point of preserving knowledge if civilizations were doomed anyway? Why try to save the galaxy if it would all end eventually? But then, Caliburn spoke not through the arena's speakers, but directly into her mind. "True strength isn't about avoiding endings, Lin. It's about choosing what those endings mean." The words shifted something in her perspective. She looked at the echo of endings and suddenly saw it differently. Not as a harbinger of inevitable doom, but as a being trapped in its own fatalistic worldview. "You're right," she said, surprising both the echo and herself. All things end. Civilizations rise and fall. Stars burn out. The universe itself will eventually succumb to entropy. The echo paused, apparently not having expected agreement. But, Lin continued, ending doesn't mean meaningless. The elders fell, but they left behind knowledge warnings, hope for the next civilizations. My life will end, but it can still have meaning in the time I have. The galaxy will change, but what we do with it while we're here matters. She began to move again, and this time, her movements carried something the echo couldn't negate: purpose. Not the desperate scrambling of someone trying to avoid death, but the determined action of someone who understood that limited time made each moment more precious, not less. Endings give meaning to beginnings, she said, as the arena around them began to warm again as color returned to the air. Without winter, spring wouldn't feel like renewal. Without night, dawn wouldn't feel like hope. The echo of endings staggered backward, its temporal distortions weakening. You accept ending. I accept that everything ends, but I refuse to accept that nothing matters because of it. For the first time, the echo of endings seemed solid, fully present in normal space-time. And in its newly corporeal form, Lin could see something she hadn't expected: relief. I had forgotten, it whispered. I had become so focused on the fact that things end that I stopped seeing the beauty of what exists before they do. I yield, it said simply, and thank you. Only one champion remained. The final challenger stepped forward, and Lin's enhanced senses immediately identified it as the most dangerous opponent yet. Not because of its size, it was roughly human-sized and proportioned, or its weapons, it carried only a simple staff. But because of its perfect stillness, its complete control, its absolute presence. I am Kethvar, it said simply. I represent no faction, no species, no ideology. I am here because I was curious. Curious about what? About you. About why an elder artifact would choose a being with no training, no exceptional abilities, no grand destiny. About what you represent that all our generals and scientists and leaders do not. Kethvar moved into a combat stance, and immediately Lin knew this fight would be different from all the others. Where the previous champions had brought specific strengths and weaknesses, specific viewpoints to challenge, Kethvar brought pure skill. No agenda, no philosophy, no weakness to exploit, just perfect technique, honed over what felt like lifetimes of practice. The battle began with a simple exchange. Kethvar struck with his staff. Lin parried. But in that moment of contact, she felt the depth of her opponent's expertise. This wasn't someone who had learned to fight. This was someone who had become fighting itself. You're very good, she said, dodging a series of attacks that seemed to flow like water. Thank you, Kethvar replied, pressing his advantage. You are less good, but more interesting. The understatement of the century. Kethvar's staff moved in patterns that seemed to defy physics, striking from angles that shouldn't exist, creating openings that appeared and disappeared faster than thought. Lin found herself relying more and more on Caliburn's enhanced abilities just to stay alive. But as the battle progressed, something strange happened. Instead of trying to match Kethvar's skill, Lin began to do what she'd done in every previous fight. She tried to understand her opponent. And what she understood was that Kethvar wasn't just fighting her, he was teaching her. Every attack was designed not just to find her weaknesses, but to show her how to overcome them. Every opening he created was also a lesson in defense. Every technique he demonstrated was an invitation to learn. You're not trying to win, she realized breathlessly, parrying a strike that could have ended the fight. Neither are you, he replied, equally breathless. Which is why this is the most interesting fight I've had in centuries. The realization changed everything. This wasn't about victory or defeat. It was about growth, about pushing each other to become more than they were. Lin stopped trying to defend and started trying to learn. Kethvar's attacks became less overwhelming and more instructive. They fought like dancers, like musicians playing a complex duet, like students and teachers taking turns in each role. The watching crowd fell completely silent, sensing that they were witnessing something transcendent. And gradually, impossibly, Lin began to match him. Not through superior skill, or strength or speed, but through something else entirely. She began to fight, not like a trained warrior but like herself, curious, observant, adaptive. She used techniques that weren't in any manual movements that came from a lifetime of navigating crowded marketplaces and broken hoverbikes and museum security protocols. "There," Kethvar said as they broke apart, both breathing hard. "Now I see it." "See what?" "Why the armor chose you." He planted his staff in the arena floor and bowed formally. "You don't fight like a warrior because you're not one. You fight like a guardian." "What's the difference?" "A warrior fights to defeat enemies. A guardian fights to protect what matters. And what you protect." He gestured to the arena, to the watching crowd, to the galaxy beyond. "Is the possibility that everyone can be more than they are." "I yield," Kethvar said with a smile. "Not because you defeated me, but because you taught me something I didn't know I needed to learn." The arena erupted in chaos. Not the violent chaos of battle, but the joyous chaos of revelation. Representatives from every species were on their feet, cheering, arguing, demanding explanations. But above it all, the administrator's voice rang out. "Combat complete. Lin Nguyen of Terra stands victorious by yielding of all opponents. The tribunal will now convene to hear testimony regarding the disposition of the elder artifact Caliburn." As the noise died down, Lin stood in the center of the arena, surrounded by the 9 champions she had faced. But instead of looking defeated, they looked hopeful. "What happens now?" she asked Caliburn. "Now," the armor replied, "we speak truth to power, and we see if the galaxy is ready to listen." The tribunal that convened in Nexus Station's Great Hall was unlike anything in galactic history. Representatives from every major species sat in a massive circular chamber with neutral arbitrators from the zone mediating. But what made it truly unprecedented was that it wasn't a trial about ownership. It was a conversation about responsibility. Lin found herself at the center of the chamber, still wearing Caliburn, facing thousands of beings whose decisions would shape the future of galactic civilization. Dr. Mai was there, having apparently made her own way to Nexus Station. Officer Ken sat with the neutral arbitrators. And in the gallery, she spotted the 9 champions she had faced, all watching with keen interest. The Harlan ambassador began the proceedings. "The events in the arena were illuminating, but they do not change the fundamental question. The Elder Artifact possesses capabilities that could ensure the security and prosperity of the Harlan Ascendancy. How can we be asked to simply trust that it will be used for the benefit of all when our own survival may depend on possessing it?" Murmurs of agreement rose from various faction representatives. The Vex delegation's leader stood. "Our analysis confirms the artifact's immense value. The knowledge it contains could advance galactic civilization by millennia. To leave it in the hands of an individual, regardless of how that individual was chosen, seems inefficient." "With respect," Officer Ken interjected, "I think you're still missing the point. The question isn't who should own the artifact. The question is whether anyone should own it at all." The chamber fell silent. Kethvar, sitting in the gallery, nodded approvingly. Lin stood and activated Caliburn's projection systems. The chamber filled with holographic displays, showing the history of Elder technology, not the dramatic battles and conquests that dominated the historical records, but the quiet moments of discovery, innovation, and wisdom that had defined Elder civilization at its peak. "I've had 3 days to learn about the Elder races," she began. "And what I've learned is that they weren't so different from us. They had the same fears, the same hopes, the same tendency to compete for resources and power. But they also had something that we're missing." The images shifted to show Elder society in its final centuries, a civilization that had transcended the need for conflict through abundance, understanding, and shared purpose. "They learned that knowledge isn't power," Lin continued. "Knowledge is responsibility, and responsibility shared wisely becomes strength for everyone. Pretty words, a Centauran general called out. But Centauran colonies are being raided by Vex expansion fleets. The Harlan Ascendancy is building weapons platforms in neutral space. The galaxy is already at war, we're just not admitting it yet. How does sharing knowledge stop us from destroying each other? Lynn looked at Caliburn, and somehow she knew what to do next. The armor's systems interfaced with the chamber's technology, and suddenly, every being present experienced something unprecedented. They saw the galaxy through each other's eyes. For a brief moment, the Harlan delegation experienced the claustrophobic desperation of Vex worlds running out of resources. The Vex felt the cultural pride and honor-bound duty that drove Harlan expansion. Every faction glimpsed the fears and motivations that drove their rivals' actions. When the vision ended, the chamber was silent. "The conflicts you're describing," Lynn said quietly, "aren't caused by your differences. They're caused by your isolation from each other. You're all fighting the same fight, trying to ensure the survival and prosperity of your people. But you're fighting against each other instead of together." Dr. Mai stood. The Elder warnings aren't just about avoiding technological disasters. They're about recognizing that genuine security can't be built on the insecurity of others. That prosperity hoarded becomes poverty shared. The cosmic consciousness representative, not resonance of distant stars, but another crystalline being pulsed with soft light. The human speaks of unity, but unity has been tried. The infinite collective's methods, the binary star's balance, the hegemony's integration, all have failed to prevent conflict. "Because you're trying to impose unity from the outside," Lynn replied. "True cooperation can't be forced. It has to be chosen again and again in every interaction, every decision, every moment of choice between fear and trust." She gestured, and the projections changed again, showing not the grand sweep of galactic history, but individual moments. A Harlan engineer helping a Vex colony repair their life support. A Centauran artist learning from a human philosopher. A dozen small acts of cooperation that had happened, despite not because of official policy. "It's already happening," she said. "People from all your worlds are already choosing to work together when they're allowed to. The problem isn't your people. It's your governments refusing to trust each other." The Binary Star's ambassador stood. "And what of the artifact if knowledge is indeed to be shared? How do we ensure it is shared fairly? How do we prevent any one faction from gaining advantage?" "That's the beauty of it," Lynn said with a smile. "Caliburn has already solved that problem." She activated the armor systems again, and suddenly every screen in the chamber displayed the same thing, a schematic of Caliburn itself. But not just its external structure, its complete technical specifications, quantum mechanical principles, even the theoretical framework for understanding Elder technology. The gasps that rose from the chamber were audible across species lines. The knowledge was never meant to be hoarded. Caliburn itself spoke, addressing the assembly directly. "My creators built me with one primary function, to ensure that wisdom survives the fall of any single civilization. Every moment I have spent with Lin Nguyen has been recorded, analyzed, and prepared for transmission." "Transmission to whom?" the Vex delegation asked. "To everyone," Lin replied. "To every university, every research station, every school, every curious individual who wants to learn. The complete knowledge base of the Elder races is now public domain." Chaos erupted in the chamber. Representatives shouted over each other in a dozen languages, some in outrage, some in excitement, some in disbelief. "You can't just—" the Harlan ambassador began. "We already have," Caliburn interrupted. "The data is being transmitted now to every networked system in the galaxy. By the time this tribunal concludes, every major university research institution and library will have complete access to Elder knowledge." This is disaster," a hegemony representative exclaimed. "The balance of power." "There is no balance of power when one side has an overwhelming advantage," Lin pointed out. "But there can be balance when everyone has access to the same knowledge." Officer Ken stood. The question before this tribunal was how to manage the Elder artifact. But the artifact has managed itself. The knowledge is already free. The question now is, what do we do with it? The chamber gradually quieted as the implications sank in. Some faction representatives were furiously speaking into communicators, undoubtedly trying to confirm what Caliburn had claimed. Others sat in stunned silence. The knowledge is dangerous. The cosmic consciousness representative pulsed. Without proper context, without understanding it, could lead to the same destruction that befell the Elders. Which is why proper context is included. Dr. Mai stepped forward, activating her own holographic display. Every piece of technology, every scientific principle, every mathematical theorem comes with complete historical context. The mistakes that led to misuse, the safeguards that were developed, the social and ethical frameworks necessary for responsible implementation. More than that, Lin added, the knowledge requires cooperation to implement. The most powerful Elder technologies can only be built by teams that include multiple species, multiple perspectives. It's literally impossible to use them for domination because they're designed to require trust and collaboration to function. The Vex delegation leader's optical sensors flickered rapidly, the equivalent of surprised blinking. Fascinating. A built-in safeguard against misuse. The Elders learned from their mistakes, Caliburn confirmed. They ensured that their most dangerous technologies could not be used by any single group, no matter how powerful. Kethvar stood in the gallery. May I address the tribunal? Officer Ken nodded permission. I have spent the last several hours reviewing the data that has been released, Kethvar said. Among the Elder knowledge are complete instructions for technologies that could end scarcity throughout the galaxy. Renewable energy systems that could power civilizations for millions of years. Medical techniques that could extend the lifespan of every species. Transportation technology that could make interstellar travel as easy as walking across a room. He paused, letting this sink in. But they all require cooperation to implement. Resource sharing, knowledge exchange, trust between species. The Elders have given us the tools to build paradise, if we can learn to work together. And if we can't, someone called out. Then we'll go the way of the Elders, Lin said simply. The knowledge includes detailed records of civilizations that failed to cooperate, that tried to hoard wisdom for advantage. They all followed the same path to destruction. The chamber was quiet for a long moment. Finally, the Harlan ambassador stood again. This is not what we expected when we came to claim the artifact. Expectations, Lin replied, are often the first casualty of actual wisdom. What happens now? The Centauran general asked. The knowledge is released, yes. But what of the artifact itself? What of the bearer? Lin looked down at Caliburn, feeling the weight of the armor. Not just its physical weight, but the weight of responsibility it represented. I never wanted to be a hero, she said quietly. I still don't. But I've learned something over the past few days. Heroes aren't the people who want to save the world. Heroes are the people who do what needs to be done when everyone else is arguing about whether it's possible. She gestured, and the armor began to change. Still covering her body, still providing its enhancements, but now translucent, allowing everyone to see the person within. I'll continue to partner with Caliburn for as long as I'm needed. To help with the transition, to provide guidance where I can, to stand between anyone who tries to use Elder knowledge for domination and the people they would oppress. And when you're no longer needed, Kethvar asked. Lin smiled. Then I'll go back to my apartment, heat up some synthetic noodles, and watch holodramas about other people's adventures. And I'll be delighted to be bored again. The laughter that rippled through the chamber had a quality Lin hadn't heard before. Not the polite diplomatic chuckles of formal proceedings, but genuine amusement shared across species lines. There is one more matter, Officer Ken said, as the laughter subsided. The various fleets that came to claim the artifact are still in orbit around Nexus Station. Some of them have already downloaded the Elder archives and begun transmitting them to their home governments. Others remain skeptical. skeptical of what Lin asked. Of whether this is genuine, whether the knowledge is complete and unedited, whether this isn't some elaborate deception to gain advantage. Caliburn's holographic displays activated again, showing the orbital space around Nexus Station. True to Ken's words, dozens of ships from various factions remained in an uneasy standoff. Then, let's give them a demonstration, Lin said. What kind of demonstration? Dr. Mai asked carefully. The kind that ends all doubt about whether the knowledge is real. An hour later, Lin stood on Nexus Station's main observation deck, looking out at the assembled fleet. Beside her, Dr. Mai worked with a team of elder knowledge experts who had arrived from various ships. The observation deck had been converted into a temporary laboratory filled with equipment representing the most advanced technology available to galactic civilization. Are you absolutely certain about this? Dr. Mai asked for the third time. No, Lin replied cheerfully. But I haven't been certain about anything for days, and it's worked out so far. Around them, scientists and engineers from a dozen species worked frantically to assemble something that, according to the Elder Archives, should be impossible, a device that could transmute any form of matter into any other form at the quantum level. Even if the theory is sound, a Vex engineer muttered, the power requirements alone should be impossible to meet with our current technology. Which is why we're not using current technology, Lin pointed out. We're using Elder technology. Or rather, we're building Elder technology using the complete specifications they left behind. The device they were assembling looked like nothing so much as a crystalline flower, its petals made of materials that seemed to shift between solid and energy states. At its center lay a core of what the Elders had called condensed possibility matter that existed in superposition between all possible states until observation collapsed it into a specific form. Power core is stable, reported a Harlan engineer whose species' natural electromagnetic sensitivity made her ideal for monitoring energy flows. Quantum matrices aligned, added a Centauran, whose 4 arms allowed him to calibrate multiple systems simultaneously. All safety protocols engaged, said the cosmic consciousness representative, whose species' natural connection to cosmic forces helped regulate the device's reality-bending aspects. Working together, Lin realized. More cooperation between species than had been seen in decades, all focused on a single task that none of them could have accomplished alone. Initializing, she announced, placing her hands on the device's interface points. Through Caliburn, she could feel the machine's complex systems coming online, reality bending around the crystalline structure like space-time around a massive star. Target material, Dr. Mai asked. Lin looked around the observation deck and spotted a potted plant, one of the decorative specimens that gave the station a more welcoming atmosphere. She plucked a single leaf. Chlorophyll to diamonds, she said, placing the leaf in the device's transmutation chamber. The device hummed with power that seemed to vibrate in dimensions beyond the normal 3. Light that wasn't quite light flickered through the crystalline petals. And then, with a sound like the universe sighing, it was done. Where the green leaf had been a perfect diamond now, lay still shaped exactly like the original leaf, every vein and cell structure preserved, but transmuted to pure carbon crystal. The observation deck fell silent. By the ancestors, the Harlan engineer whispered. It actually worked. More than worked, the Vex engineer corrected, scanning the diamond with increasingly sophisticated instruments. The atomic structure is perfect. No flaws, no stress fractures. This should be impossible. And yet, Lin said, picking up the diamond leaf, here it is. She activated Caliburn's communication systems, broadcasting to every ship in orbit. This is Lin Nguyen aboard Nexus Station. What you've just witnessed is a demonstration of technology built entirely from the Elder Archives released 3 hours ago. The device we used requires components that can only be manufactured by at least 5 different species, working in cooperation. The knowledge is real. The possibilities are unlimited. But they all require one thing. She held up the diamond leaf, catching the station's light and throwing rainbows across the observation deck. Trust. The response from the fleet was immediate. Communications channels opened as faction leaders demanded technical specifications, offered research partnerships, proposed joint expeditions to elder sites mentioned in the archives. But underneath the chaos of political and military communication, something else was happening. Science ships began docking with the station. Research teams requested joint meetings. Engineers asked to examine the transmutation device. For the first time in decades, the galaxy's greatest minds were working together instead of in competition. "It's really happening," Dr. Mai said quietly, watching as a Harlan physicist explained quantum resonance theory to a Vex computational matrix, both of them scribbling equations that neither could have derived alone. "The transition won't be easy," Caliburn warned. "There will be those who resist, who try to use the knowledge for domination, who fear the changes it will bring." "There always are," Lynn agreed. "But look around. Look at what's possible when people choose trust over fear." Over the following days, Nexus Station transformed from a simple trading post into the de facto capital of a new kind of galactic civilization. The Elder Archives contained more than just technical specifications. They included social frameworks, philosophical insights, and practical guides for building diverse multi-species societies. Lynn found herself at the center of it all, not as a leader, but as a catalyst. She mediated disputes between research teams, provided context for elder technologies, and served as a living reminder that the most advanced civilization in galactic history had chosen cooperation over conquest. "You know," she said to Caliburn one evening, as they stood on the observation deck watching construction crews work on a new research facility, "when I took that security job, I thought the most exciting thing that would happen would be the occasional drunk tourist trying to touch the exhibits." "Are you regretting the change?" Caliburn asked. Lynn considered this seriously. "Ask me again in 100 years. But right now, I think I'm exactly where I need to be." Below them, a Centauran engineer was teaching a group of human children how to manipulate gravity fields using elder techniques. Across the viewing area, a Harlan artist was collaborating with a Vex quantum sculptor to create something that existed partially in normal space and partially in mathematical dimensions. "The elders would be proud," Caliburn said quietly. "The elders screwed up spectacularly and almost destroyed themselves," Lynn pointed out. "But they learned from their mistakes. They left us the tools to do better." "And you think we will do better?" Lynn watched a mixed species research team celebrate a breakthrough in biocompatible technology that would allow different atmospheres to be shared safely. She saw former enemies sharing meals and ideas. She saw children of different species playing games that had been invented that morning, combining the rules of a dozen different worlds. "Yeah," she said, "I think we might actually pull this off." Years later, when historians tried to pinpoint the moment galactic civilization changed course from the path that had destroyed the elders, they would point to the Battle of Nexus Station, to the great revelation of the Elder Archives, to the first multi-species council that established new frameworks for cooperation. But Lynn knew the real turning point had been smaller and more personal, the moment she'd stopped running from responsibility and started running toward it. The moment she'd realized that the greatest heroes weren't the ones who sought glory, but the ones who did what needed to be done when no one else would. She never did get back to her apartment and her synthetic noodles. But she did eventually find time to watch holodramas again, usually with friends from a dozen different species, all arguing enthusiastically about the plot while sharing snacks from their various homeworlds. And sometimes, late at night when Nexus Station was quiet and the stars painted patterns across the observation deck, she would take off the Caliburn armor and just be Lynn Nguyen for a while. A security guard who had stumbled into saving the galaxy, not through strength or brilliance or heroic destiny, but through the simple radical act of paying attention to what mattered. The armor would stand beside her in those moments, no longer ancient and mysterious, but simply a friend who had waited 73 million years for someone to notice that the best way to guard something precious wasn't to lock it away, but to share it with people you trusted, to guard it too. And in those quiet moments looking out at a galaxy, slowly learning to trust itself, Lynn would think that maybe being a hero wasn't about being special at all. Maybe it was just about being human enough to believe that everyone else could be heroes too.